nothing bad happens on 420, as the
Right.
saying goes. That's what the
I mean,
kids say, right?
Hitler
420,
was
nothing bad
born.
happens. Yeah.
Hitler was born. Yada yada
Yeah,
yada.
but he died eventually, so that had a happy ending.
Not soon enough.
Oh, okay. Well,
Not
I
enough
haven't read the
time
history
machines.
books.
He
I
became a
don't know that
vampire
full
hunter.
story yet. Yeah.
He became a vampire hunter. It was pretty crazy.
Don't write that book. Don't write that book.
Sorry, guys.
Plenty of books, plenty of stuff where the Nazis are zombies, but let's not write that book. Anyhow, welcome to what is going to be a very fun, just fancy-free episode of 99 to 25. I'm John Brooks.
I'm Jenn Tisdale. I'm feeling great.
Feeling great. This is one we have been looking forward to. So, but it intersects with some of our sort of interests and expertise, so we might as well talk about it. We're gonna do it differently this time around. We're not gonna spend a lot of time on the first 19 days of April. We're gonna kind of run through them because not a lot of really interesting stuff happened. April got interesting on 420 on April the 20th. So we're going to talk mostly about that, but we should talk a little bit about some of the other stuff that is going on. There are some interesting movies released in that period of time. We got Cookie's Fortune by Robert Altman, released on April the 2nd, a movie that I don't think I've ever seen. Have I? I don't think I've seen that one.
I don't think I've seen that one either, but just the name Robert Altman makes me laugh. Just hearing his name.
You know what's wild? So, like, one of the many things about 99 that is so kind of crazy to me, if you just ask somebody like who are the most well-known American auteurs in history, right? Like who like when you think American directors, like auteur directors, like who do you think of, right? It wouldn't take long for most people to get to both Robert Altman and Martin Scorsese, right? Within like 5 or 10, maybe.
Even if they didn't realize it, they're not going to realize one of them. They're going to accidentally stumble upon one of those good fellows. No, on one of those guys.
They both had movies in 99, and nobody ever talks about either of them, which is so bizarre to me. But we'll eventually get to it. But yeah, Robert Altman had Cookie's Fortune with Glenn Close and Julianne Moore and a bunch of other people. Julianne Moore had much better movies that year. A lot of them, actually. And of course, Martin Scorsese had Bringing Out the Dead, which came out at a different time.
That was a weird one.
That's a really good movie, though. I like that.
That was a weird one. I liked it, but it was weird.
It was weird. Also, the second, The Out of Towners with Steve Martin and Goldie Hawn.
I love that movie.
Looking forward to doing that one eventually.
I'm excited for that.
Tony Goldwyn's A Walk on the Moon with Diane Lane and Viggo Mortensen is also on the 2nd. Go comes out the 9th. Never Been Kissed also on the 9th. The Spanish release of Pedro Almodovar's All About My Mother, it does not come out in the US until the year 2000. Hideous Kinky, starring Kate Winslet.
Oh, I love Hideous Kinky.
April the 16th, and Life with Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence, also on April the 16th. So some good movies, but like a lot of kind of under the radar good movies, because everybody, of course, is currently watching The Matrix at the time, so nobody's really paying much attention to any of those movies, which is why they were pretty much all box office bombs that have gotten more popular in time. Also on April the 6th, Mamma Mia debuts in London's West End. It has been running nonstop ever since, except for a short interruption by COVID-19 in March of 2020. It also, of course, spawned a movie adaptation and a movie sequel a few years later. I have not seen To Mama To Mia. I've never seen that one. Have you seen that one?
E to Mamma Mia, Champion. I have not. I think
More Mamma Mia. I like that should have been the title.
I've never seen the stage production. I've sort of watched the movie. I do like ABBA. I don't know if is that enough? Is that enough?
That's enough.
Will it ever be enough? I love palindromes. What's there not to like about ABBA?
I mean, the movie has, if you like ABBA, the movie has ridiculously awesome people in it, right? I mean, it's got Stellar Skateboards and Pierce Brosnan and
Stellar Skateboards.
And what's her name there? The Meryl Streep. She's in that
Yep.
one.
What's her name? Meryl Streep. That's
Julie
her.
Waters,
She dropped it. Became just Meryl Streep.
Christine Baranski, right? Isn't it? It is.
Yeah.
It is. It's a block. Oh, Colin Firth. It's a blockbuster.
Elizabeth Holmes.
Block.
She's in it.
Elizabeth Holmes.
She's in it.
What?
Where she,
Oh, right.
Amanda Seyfried.
like what? Did she have a career before being a weird?
This is technically also a motion picture about like blood and DNA. Not even technically, it
you can
is.
see how
so
she got the idea from Mamma Mia. Really,
there's a through line. Yeah, from Mamma Mia to The Dropout. It's very clear.
It's it's the subtext of ABBA's music is like, what if we could diagnose all diseases with blood?
It's the prequel.
It's what Dancing Queen is really about when you think about the lyrics.
As you
April the
should.
9th, April the 9th, Comedy Central debuts Strangers with Candy, starring Daris. I know. It's such a great show. And co-produced and starring Stephen Colbert, among others. This was in addition to The Daily Show with Jon Stewart launching a few months earlier, this is, of course, part of Comedy Central's effort to become a content producer that we would call today.
Boy, did they ever.
Yeah, instead of just rerunning a bunch of nonsense, they started doing their own, even live action TV shows. And Strangers with the Candy was, if not the first original live action scripted television show Comedy Central did, it's certainly one of them. But it might have been the first. I'm not sure. I can't think of one before it, but I might be missing something. But because it did a lot of Kids in the Hall reruns, but of course,
yeah.
Kids in the Hall was not Comedy Central, nor was MST3K originally on Comedy Central.
God, I used to stay up and watch episodes of MST3K with my friend Jeff, and we would just be on the phone together, silent, which for anyone young listening to this, just to be on your landline but not speaking while watching something and occasionally laughing, that was hanging out in the 90s. That was hanging out.
That's what, yes. Every once in a while I'd be like, "You still there? You awake?" Like, yeah.
Like, that was so good. Silence.
Yeah. April 11th, the BAFTAs repeats many of the same mistakes of the Oscars, including giving the top honor to Shakespeare in Love, but they do make one important correction, handing the directing award to history's most underrated director, Peter Weir, for The Truman Show. Peter Weir has never made a bad movie, and most of his movies are amazing. So the guy who directed The Dead Poets Society, The Truman Show, Master and Commander, Witness, he's just such an amazing director. But yes, he deserved it. He got the BAFTA when he should have gotten the Oscar, but there you go. Good job, British people. But not Shakespeare in Love. What are you doing? Stop it.
Well, in Britain they were legally obligated to give it. They had to. That's their hometown. That's their hometown boy. That's their sweet, perfect hometown boy, and they had to do it. It's a law there.
They're perfect make believe hometown boy. We won't go there this time around. Tal Bachman, April the 13th. Speaking of the soundtrack of 1999, you can't.
Isn't that the do 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 do?
She sure is. She's so high.
I did love that video. I thought that was a delightful video.
It is a genuinely a great pop song. I mean, it's one of those songs like Breakfast at Tiffany's where it's it might not amount to much, but it's just a damn good pop song. It's really hard to deny that this is an infectious good pop song. And it is among, with Mambo Number 5 and, the other ones we talked about, just one of the songs that was just fucking everywhere. And there's a new commercial for insurance, I think. I don't know, probably. Most commercials are for insurance that uses it, that just came out. And I'm like, it's never going to go away. The single for She's So High was released in February of that year and had already taken over the airwaves, but the full album came out April the 13th. She's So High is the definition of a one-hit wonder. Bachman is, of course, the son of Randy Bachman of Bachman Turner Overdrive.
Oh my God, I didn't know he was a Nepo baby. How could I? We didn't have the internet.
Oh, of course. This story
I just assumed he was the son of Richard Bachman, Stephen King's. Nom de plume.
No, that's Joe. What's his name?
Joe Hill.
Joe Hill. Right. Yeah. It's so confusing. Just pick a fucking name. Jesus Christ.
I wish that he had picked Joe Turner and then it could be Richard Bachman and Joe Turner. And they got another kid. And I'm like, this one, go for Overdrive. God, that would have been
Overdrive. Bachman's record peaked at 124th on the Billboard charts, and he only made one more, 2004's Staring Down the Sun, before pursuing his true love, being a right-wing lunatic goon,
Oh
writing
no.
screeds about the evils of Anthony Fauci, wokeism, and of course the globalists.
Is it because he failed? If he this is like Hitler on a very small scale. Had he done better, he would not be here today. He'd just be still singing soulfully at like a little cafe somewhere, and people would be like, "Oh yeah, that guy."
I researched very little about Tal Bachman because once I found this out, I'm like, fuck that guy. But it turns out I think it is a combination of he failed and also before he recorded She's So High when he was 31, when this album came out, he was already married and had 8 kids and grew up like
No, that's too many.
a super devout Mormon. So like, this trajectory is not entirely unsurprising to me.
Oh, so that She's So High, she's a literal angel. That's a secret. That's a secret, or maybe not so secret.
Oh no,
Religious
it's not.
song.
It's not about drugs. It's very
No,
clear.
I didn't think it was. And
Yeah,
because she's
no.
literally like an angel in the music video. If memory serves,
She's
she has
like
wings on and everything.
Aphrodite or Joan of Arc or Cleopatra.
Petra.
He
Yeah, those
currently.
are 3 of the best. Someone said think of women.
we
Boom,
don't make
boom,
him like
boom,
Joan
boom.
of Arc anymore. That's for
They
sure.
don't. Yeah, he
Wokeism.
probably would love to be with a woman who like is a martyred herself for
Oh
Christ.
my god,
Oh,
absolutely.
he was probably so horny for that.
He also sounds like would have been one of the people lighting the fire. So yeah, who knows?
Probably.
You know, we all contain multitudes. Bachman also currently tours as a member of Bachman Turner Overdrive. So the Nepo went full Nepo. All right, a couple more things before we get to the meaty stuff. On April the 13th, a dark day for stoned insomniac fans of absurdist humor as MTV cancels its sock puppet variety show Syphil and Ollie. The show's cult continues to exist, and it was briefly resurrected online 10 years ago as a video game review series. Development on a Syphil and Ollie video game was announced in 2018, but is yet to materialize. I loved Syphil and Ollie at 2:00 in the morning. I'm telling, it's a great show.
I have nothing to say.
Did you ever watch it? You never watched it?
A couple times, but not enough to feel emotionally connected to it. I was more of a like a liquid television on
Yeah.
Flux sort of.
Right,
That
right,
was my
right.
like late night MTV excursion was into that.
I can't quote anything from it. I don't remember. It's all vibes.
It's
But
all
I just remember like being bored at 2 a.m. and being like, this is the best thing ever. I love this show.
That's a nice memory though.
It's not asking anything of me, and it's just stupid and absurd, and it's great. And then finally, on April the 18th, Wayne Gretzky, the greatest, then with the New York Rangers, plays his final game, losing 2-1 to Jaromir Jagr's Pittsburgh Penguins.
They should have let him win. Come on, guys. Like, this is his last game. Let this man just go out on top.
He's the greatest, Jaromir Jagr. What's your fucking problem?
Yeah, we can't remember that name, but only because I could not. Like, say it again.
Jaromir Jagr. It's JAROMIR Not enough vowels, by the way, but yeah, he played for the Bruins at one point as well, late in his career. Wayne Gretzky retiring 25 years ago both feels too long ago and not long enough. Weirdly, like
he looks great. He was on, what podcast was he on? I'm going to assume it was Smartless, and I heard him on because Will Arnett is Canadian and obviously a big hockey fan, so that makes sense. And he was really delightful, funny, charming. Yeah. So there you go. Had been playing since he was like born. I think that's also a law in Canada.
It is, yeah. And you are executed if you don't score 3 goals by the time you're.
But it's like a nice it's like it's a gentle execution with kindness.
Well, you can choose
they kill you with kindness.
Yeah. and that's it. And then a day goes by, April 19th, where everything's quiet in the Western Front and nothing happens. And then what is probably the most significant cultural event that sort of changes a lot of people's perception of reality. And that is, of course, the patient zero of our national tradition of weekly mass shootings, the Columbine High School
Mhm.
Massacre. So we're going to talk a little bit about that because, as Jen is your other job as a true crimey person,
Yeah. That is
I
my
know you have a lot
job.
of. It's literally your job.
Yeah.
I know you have a lot to
There is
say
a lot. I
about.
mean, I've read a lot of I couldn't even like it's an overwhelming amount of information that it's barely in my brain. I mean, I could hit like the major points, including I think the most important point is wrong everybody got how wrong everybody was about Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, how
Yes.
obviously the
Yeah.
media couldn't have been more irresponsible and disgusting. No one is surprised about that. I haven't watched Bowling for Columbine in a while, but if memory serves, Michael Moore also chose to paint a rather inaccurate picture of who Klebold and Harris were. To put
Yeah.
it
I'm gonna
succinctly,
say some
these
things. I'm gonna say some things about Bowling for Columbine.
please do, please do.
At
It's been a
the end
minute, and
here.
I can't wait to revisit it.
Yeah.
Um, and again, to put it succinctly, these were not nerdy boys who were being picked on. This was not some sort of like getting back at our bullies. These guys were
Yeah.
actually bullies, and in particular, Eric Harris, who was the more aggressive, dominant friend, and was after the fact was basically diagnosed as a textbook psychopath based
Right. Yep.
probably I think when they got this was a great thing about 1999. Sorry, sound like I was about to say Columbine. It's a great thing about Columbine. There's you can there are and you can find them online. I've already pulled them up. We have access to both their journal entries. They have journals, or as I like to call it, because gender is a construct, their diaries. Sick burn, fellas. They're called diaries. I don't know why we've decided boys writing journals and girls writing diaries, but today the Columbine tuners wrote in diaries. Yeah. So that's that. I mean, I feel like we should at least speak a little bit about what happened because I don't think you'll be
Yeah.
surprised to learn, John, that younger people, some of them don't even know what this is,
Or why
have
it's a
not
big
heard of
deal
it.
because it happens so frequently now, and that's part of its legacy is that it was not by any means like a shocking event that forced us to seriously look at the way that we live in this country, but rather a prelude to just a systemic failure to protect human life in this country uh, over this so-called Second Amendment right to have whatever fucking firearms you want all the
That
time
that's
because
right. And that is another
God
thing
and
that happened. The way that they were able to procure these guns, it was shockingly simple.
yeah. So let's talk about. So I think like well, let's talk about what did happen first, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the because you could literally just spend hours talking about all the things the myths that the media have gotten wrong.
It's
Um,
incredibly overwhelming, and I don't like
yeah,
to
it's too
suggest
much.
somebody listen to there's probably a lot of podcasts on it. I will say that I re-listened to last podcast's two-part series they did on Columbine.
Hmm.
They're pretty thorough. They go through a lot of they go through some of the conspiracies, but they also go through some of there was a police cover-up effort that happened that was they later figured out. I mean, there was many things that could have prevented this. People
Right,
thought that this was a big surprise, and it turns out the police had actually had their eyes on Klebold and Harris for a little while. They were
right.
already kind of looking at them. So, yeah. I don't know where to begin. Where does one even begin? I mean, they were gosh, where should we begin? I don't want to
Let's
begin at
talk
the
about what
day of.
let's just talk about like what happened like first and
Well, on that day and start to finish, the shooting actually only lasted about 45 minutes. So this was the morning of April 20th at around, I think it's 11:10 is when Eric Harris gets to the parking lot of Columbine High School. They actually had pipe bombs. So this was their plan all along. So they had pipe bombs in the school, and their plan was to actually detonate these pipe bombs. And as people were running out of the building, they were going to pick them off. That was their original plan. Had these pipe bombs actually detonated, it would have been it would have been huge. There is rumor, I think it was unconfirmed, that a few weeks prior, Eric Harris's father had found one of the pipe bombs and chose not to do anything about it. Uh, I think we'll probably talk about the parents later. The way that they reacted differently to this is pretty interesting. So Eric Harris arrives. They drove. They drove separately. Guys, environment. It's okay. I'm so sorry. All I see is that he had a 1986 Honda Civic, and I'm like, I know that car. I do.
Yeah.
Uh, yep. And
Yeah.
then Dylan Klebold, who obviously had a much nicer life, arrived in his 1982 black BMW. What a dick. And yeah, they entered into, they were like right by the school cafeteria. I think they started shooting on the outside because they shot a couple of kids who were walking outside. So, but by 11:14, they were walking into the school. They had bags of gun. They had just bags of guns. Also, I didn't realize this was I'm so sorry to have like memories of high school on occasion, which is maybe not appropriate, but they were arriving during a lunch. And I had such a vivid memory of our lunches also being broken up by like A lunch, B lunch. C, I mean, I was on the other
Hmm.
side of the country. I didn't
Hmm.
realize that was something we were all doing. And that when I read A lunch,
Universal
I went,
experience.
oh
Yeah.
God, A lunch. That's right. Yes. So these crazy. So I think the bags actually had the pipe bombs in them, and they were scheduled to explode at 11:17 a.m., but obviously that didn't happen, thank God. They ran into a friend of theirs outside actually, and this was someone they had a falling out with. His first name is Brooks. I apologize. I can't remember his last name, but I think Eric Harris had said to him in the parking lot, he said, "Brooks, we're good now. You need to go." And he left. I don't know what I think if that were me, I would have been like, sure, sure, my dude. And I would have walked right back into school. I guess I was a good girl. But Brooks left. And as he was leaving, like he had walked like probably about 15 to 20 minutes, not, probably less, because he heard the first gunshot and he was able to get to a cell phone and that he called the police. But that's crazy. I do not know where that person is today, but boy, I hope he thanks the deity of his favorite deity all day, every day for walking away.
Yeah. Or I mean,
So,
he might have tremendous survivor's guilt as well. Like who, like yeah.
I mean, he also just knew his friend. That's another thing about Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold is that everyone suspected that something was going to happen. But of course, back then
Yeah.
we didn't have the robust history of school shootings that we do today. So it would never have occurred to anyone that they were about to walk into the school at loaded tits to toes with guns and pipe bombs. It's so crazy to me. If you told me right now, and I know it's 25 years later, if you said, Jen, go get a gun, I'd be like, where? I don't know. Where? What is a place? Is it where it
Yeah.
says gun? Maybe? Or the gun on the building? Is that the place? Couldn't tell you. Couldn't tell you where to get that. It feels so crazy to me that they were able to do this. So we'll talk about the trench coats in a second. That was
Yeah.
actually another like misnomer,
Yeah. Yeah.
shocker.
Yeah.
It is interesting to know that one of them was bought from Sam's Club. It was a Dracula costume. You're
Jesus
welcome.
Christ. Okay.
Listen, I love vampires. How dare they? How dare
Yeah.
they?
It's Sully the Name of Dracula.
So at about 11:19 a.m., one of the kids hears either Eric or Dylan yell, "Go, go." They pull their shotguns out of the bags. They have 9mm semi-automatic weapons hidden under their coats. And they begin shooting there at like the top of the steps at the school. And they're shooting like downstairs. And those first shots kill Rachel Scott and they injure Richard Castaldo, and they were eating lunch outside. So I guess they were maybe, it's hard for me to picture where they were because what I'm reading from is not super accurate in that regard. I'm just trying to
Mhm.
get us to the library, which I'm sure, as you know, John, is where the bulk
Yeah.
of the deaths and the injuries occur. So they'd come in through the side door of the school cafeteria. And oh God, this is such a 90s thing too. On their way to the quote unquote smokers pit. Come on. I'm sorry. I don't want to make jokes, but I have to do something or I'll die. So then there's students sitting on the grass in the smokers pit. As they're trying to run, they're shot. Michael Johnson is shot. He's able to reach the outdoor athletic storage shed. He takes cover. Mark Taylor suffers a debilitating gunshot wound. He can't get up. They go back downstairs to the area outside the cafeteria. They shoot Daniel Rohrbo at close range, killing him instantly. They also shoot Lance Kirkland If memory serves, I think Lance was shot in the face. If you've ever seen, there's one of the survivors that has a lot of scarring on his face. I think they shot like half of his. I don't know if you want me to get specific. I don't mind these sorts of specifics, but maybe someone might be upset by them. But I don't know. I just think it's important
Yeah.
to discuss like how gruesome and terrible this was.
Yep.
So they go in through the cafeteria. It's Klebold's inside the cafeteria. They're like, oh, the bombs haven't exploded, so it's time to switch gears, I guess. They shoot down. They're by a set of stairs. They shoot down the stairs again, hitting Anne Marie Holzschalter. She was shot multiple times. I believe she was paralyzed. Side story about her. A few months later, I think it's a few months, her mother walked into, I want to say, a pawn shop or a gun store, bought a gun, and killed herself right there in the store. This
Yeah.
girl's mother.
Yep.
Yeah. It's all, but her daughter, I think she lived. So I was very like, why'd you do that? So
I
they,
mean, the trauma.
well, the trauma, but that's the
Yeah.
mother. I don't. Your daughter lived. She's
I know, but
older.
as a parent, especially as a parent, knowing that I had one of my kids went through that and also was victimized, even if they didn't die, I can understand that the extent of just the trauma of just the amount of like guilt that you have for like letting your kid go to school and feeling like you failed them because you let them go to
Yeah.
fucking school. I can, yeah, I mean, I certainly can, and I would imagine that she was dealing with other things as well, right? Like this is
Yeah.
probably not fully in isolation, but yeah, I mean, it makes I understand it, right? Like I can see how you get how
Yeah.
you get there, even if your kid survives.
Yeah.
Level of
You're right. It
there.
was trauma. I mean, there was ripples and ripples of
Yeah,
trauma.
yeah,
It's important. It's also important to point out that there's a lot of video footage of them inside the school, and they are very clearly Klebold less than Harris, but still, they're having a good time.
yeah.
There's no other way to put it.
No,
They're having a good time. At this point, one witness hears one of them shout, "This is what we always wanted to do. This is awesome." Um, so at 11:21, a Jefferson County Sheriff's deputy is paroling the South area, and he's like paroling the area, and he's the first one dispatched to the scene. So at this point, it's literally been like less than 10 minutes. So then let's see, 11:23, 911 calls from a Columbine high school student. There's a girl injured on the parking lot. So they're now figuring it out. Obviously, the cops are now coming from every single direction. Let's see, 11:24. So there's some people too that's important to realize is that during all of this, at one point, a fire alarm has been pulled.
yeah,
So while everyone is trying to figure out what's happening, trying to run, trying to hide, there's this loud fire alarm coming. And then at some point during all of this too, they have to take their coat. One of them has to take their coat off, the trench coat. Somebody like turns their hat around. This sort of thing is what after the fact when people are like when the kids come out and they're talking to the police or to media, they're saying there's multiple gunmen, but it's really just because they took off a jacket.
yeah,
They like switched their hat around. I mean, they went through the school, but where I'm trying to get to, I don't want to like, suggest that no one else's death is important, but when they end up in the library, which is like basically a trap. It's like
yeah,
a
yeah,
trap, right? It's like
yeah,
there's nowhere to go. There's tons of kids in the library. I think it's around 11:24, and they open fire on I mean they're just shooting kids in this library. Ultimately I think 12 or 13 died. It's crazy that I don't know the number because as I was writing about it, sometimes I saw 12 and sometimes I saw 13. I definitely know that 24 were shot and lived. And I mean, I don't know if I need to get into the specifics beyond there's certain stories that became sort of myth and
yeah,
lore. The girl
yeah, yeah,
who said yes is one of them. There's the kid who crawled out the window. He crawled across the library floor, and this is his words, across past all of his friends who had been
yeah,
either killed or wounded.
yeah,
And he was shot too, and he fell out the window. You can see it. You'll see footage of or even pictures of their two cops standing beneath a window, and a kid who's bloodied, and he's falling down the side of the window.
yeah,
And I mean, I know I sort of breezed over the end there, but I think we sort of get the gist of what was going on is when they, and then when you could also see at some point they become almost bored. They're bored. They've done what they came to do. They probably, at least Eric Harris, who's a psychopath, has decided that this just wasn't a good time anymore. He's probably already moved on from it. And so they both shot themselves. I know that I think Eric shot himself. He put the gun in his mouth, and Dylan Klebold put it to, I think, his left temple. Always annoying when they
Mm.
are not alive to pay for their sins, as it were.
Yeah, it's like
But
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and then it was just chaos. It was chaos. I think it took the cops 3 hours. Like just again, the shooting itself was 45 minutes, but it took them several hours to figure out. They didn't know the shooters were dead, obviously, but also to move through the school. And then kids kept saying they heard gunshots, but that was cops were doing to clear the school. They were shooting locked doors open just to make sure it was okay. It was chaotic. And then all the while on the outside, what's happening is now the media has arrived and they are just grabbing children as they're running out
yeah,
and trying to get statements from people who are in shock. And I think you and I both also are aware of how unreliable anybody's, it's famously unreliable, is witness. Like
yeah,
witnesses. I know we love a witness. I love a witness too. Can I get a witness? But famously, especially immediately afterwards, you got nothing that's going to
sure.
be valuable or even vaguely accurate. So that's what was happening on that day. And on every television across the country and possibly the world. I don't know how much attention this garnered outside of the United States.
I mean, quite a
That's
bit. Certainly not to the extent that it did in the U.S., obviously, but yeah, it was shocking to the whole world. And like we should be clear. So I mean, there's things about this that make it unique, which is why I think it was such a uh, singular kind of a moment. Because like school shootings had happened before, and even like mass casualty school shootings had already kind of been an emerging thing that people were talking about. There's a lot of things about this one in particular that made it different. I think that you can't overlook the time, right? That like again, we've talked about this before, but like 1999 is an especially tense time. People are genuinely worried about the end of the world in 2000. They're genuinely worried about the Y2K thing. It's just the concept of like a year that starts with two is just like this weird sort
yeah.
of existential weirdness that people are sort of having a hard time getting around. There's like the looming end of the Clinton years, that sort of thing. There's also a decade of this sort of creation of a kind of criminal fear culture around like super predators and all this bullshit. There's a lot of people who are just scared of their own shadow in the 1990s, mostly because things were going well for most people, so you have to give Americans something to be terrified of, right? That's kind of the rule. And so this kind of falls on the end of that. But also, I mean, it is like certainly we didn't have the internet and social media the way we do today.
No.
We had AOL Instant Messenger, and we had websites, and we had
Yeah,
streaming
I mean, Eric
video in its
Harris had his
infancy.
own website, which is
Yeah,
where
yeah,
all of his terrible thoughts lived, and that's part of the reason why his parents had
and they created like vlogs, like streaming video stuff, like, and
the
this is
base.
like
They had the
pretty,
basement tapes. They
yeah,
recorded themselves
and they up
fucking around with their guns.
did they or did they not upload it to the internet? Okay,
I
I don't.
don't think they did because the
Okay,
basement tapes were destroyed in 2015, and something tells me that if they had made their way to the internet.com,
right, right,
then
right,
there
right,
it
right.
would have been impossible, but they were physically destroyed, which honestly, that makes me very mad. That was irresponsible. I don't think they
Yeah,
should have done that. You can kind of see the transcript is still available. I read a part of it as well. I think that what was also different about this is the theatrics surrounding it. I mean, in other school
yeah, it's a
shootings,
terrorist attack. Yeah,
it
yeah,
was pretty like, you know, not it wasn't a stage, but Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, this was like a performance, probably more for Eric Harris than Dylan Klebold, who was suffering in a bunch of different ways. They were both suffering. And here's the part where I can
yeah,
find a lot of sympathy for these people despite everything that was going on because, you know, I just it's unfortunate to be alive in a time when you're suffering like that, and there's actually no excuse for Eric Harris, whose parents had put him in therapy. He was in
Mhm.
therapy. He was medicated. That's another theory, conspiracy theory about Luvox, that they were
Yeah,
both on.
it's
I've
MK
never
Ultra.
heard of Luvox
I
except
know.
for this. It's not an antidepressant I'm familiar with. So every time someone says Luvox, I'm like, was this must have been one of the earlier SSR? I have no idea. Not
Well,
earlier.
the far right, like Alex Jones contingent of the far right is insistent that the reason why all these mass shootings happen is because of psycho, psychotherapy, of drugs, right? Of antidepressants and that sort of thing. And like again, it's an obvious causal fallacy, right? Like I mean that
Yeah.
it so happens that like yeah, a lot of people are on those, and like a lot of people who commit mass atrocities like have mental health issues, but like that's not causal. Like it's not what caused it, and it's not the drugs like altering their brain chemistry so that they go out and start fucking uh, you know. Uh, terrorizing their high schools. I agree. I like one of the things. So for me, one of the things that's really difficult to process in terms of the media response and sort of the public response to it, that I sympathize with again because of the theatricality of what they did. That they did something that was obviously meant to be shocking. That was part of their sort of planning. That they organized it like a terrorist attack.
Mhm.
And so immediately like what the media goes to is like what video games are they playing, and it's
Oh,
because
I
they were playing
remember
Doom,
that.
it's because of Marilyn Manson, we'll talk about that later, like it's because of
Ugh.
the Matrix, like the Matrix, they had the trench coats and they had these bags of guns, and like that must have been what inspired them, and so on and so forth. I i sympathize with sort of jumping to that conclusion early before you have facts, because I do understand that the sheer amount of like that Eric and Dylan wanted to be seen as
Mhm.
these mythic icons, right? They wanted to be
Oh,
seen
yeah.
as like larger than life. And so, like, of course you were going to turn to kind of the trappings of popular culture and like what we think that looks like to like mimic that. But the causality ends there. And the idea that you are going to explore that any further is like so grossly irresponsible, especially because in so doing, what the media managed to do is overlook the fact that like these guys are like fucking white supremacists. Like these like they are white supremacists who like wanted to murder people. Like that ultimately is sort of what matters. Like that's the only causal element that should be considered at all. Not was it the
Yeah.
fucking Matrix.
No, I mean, in the basement tapes, they even talked about which director they thought would direct the
Yeah,
fictionalized version.
yeah,
They name checked Quentin Tarantino.
of course,
Tarantino's got a lot. They were probably big Reservoir Dogs heads,
absolutely, absolutely.
but yeah, so it was, I mean, it's strange because this is the one time where I'm like, "Oh, I do think that Eric Harris's mental illness was a pretty strong
Oh,
contributing fact."
for
Like,
sure, for sure.
undoubtedly, and Dylan Klebold, he was depressed. So his mother, so the way their parents reacted is quite different.
Yeah, yeah.
Dylan Klebold's mother, her name is Sue Klebold. She went on to become an advocate for mental health awareness. She spent a lot of time reading her son's journals after the fact, and she was able to understand that on that day, Eric Harris went to that school to murder people, and her son went into that school to kill himself,
Mm,
even though he did these other things too. I would think that Eric, not that this matters, I think that Eric ended up killing 8 students. I can't remember actually because there was one adult, so I can't remember. 8 people, and then Klebold killed 5 people. But all of Harris's journals are all about rage and how much he hates people, and he's miserable. He's very miserable, and I'm very sympathetic. It's deep. It's very painful to read. I feel so bad for him, but he was also getting help. So when you look at that, there are rare. I believe it's rare, but I think there are some people that are like, oh man, I don't know if there's anything you can do. And who knows what that answer is? And boy,
yeah,
does that break my heart. Nothing makes me more sad than thinking that someone is perhaps a lost cause. But Klebold's journal entries were all about wanting to kill himself only. His feelings were never directed outward. It was all inward. Eric Harris hated the world and he thought that everybody was stupid and deserved to die, and Dylan Klebold hated himself and he thought he deserved to die.
Hmm.
And it was the perfect friendship because, Harris needed he needed somebody to just like, he was like a parasite. He just needed a host to latch onto, or I don't know. It's just, who knows? Who knows how they found each other and figured out that this would be a great thing to do. But yeah, so
Yeah. Um, so one of the things that is a common misconception is this trench coat mafia thing.
oh yeah.
Explain that, because that I think a lot of people still make that sort of misnomer.
Yeah. So, as I said, I can't remember who bought a trench coat. It started out as a Halloween costume. It was like a Dracula costume that was literally at like a what do they call Sam's Club or something ridiculous
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah,
And they all thought it was really cool. Oh, that looks so cool. They started wearing it all the time. Just a group of people, Dylan and Eric. I know I keep switching between their first and their last names, and I apologize if that's confusing. And a few other boys. But that didn't last for very long at all. They got over that, as children do, in a matter of like weeks. They did it for a few weeks, and then that was it. They jokingly referred to themselves as the Trench Coat Mafia for a small amount of time, and then they sort of let that go and moved past it because, as you remember, how long it's a phase. You're a kid. You move in and
yeah,
out of things until the next thing.
yeah,
But after one, because they were wearing those coats during the shooting, um, and kids started, it was the kids who were interviewed by the media who were like, oh yeah, and they were part of this thing called the trench coat mafia, and that became synonymous with the shooting itself, when that wasn't really a thing and that wasn't really part of the shooting. And then of
yeah.
course, that's when they started doing the sort of satanic panic adjacent goth
Trench coat panic. Yeah.
trench coat panic. And what's hilarious is that these guys were not goths. I mean, they both liked sports. They were well liked, kind of, even if they were miserable in their diaries. Look, I do not want to defend Dylan Klebold, but when I was reading his diary, it was very funny. I was
Well,
like, God damn it! I was
yeah,
like,
and it's. I mean, I mean, obviously, like you cannot. It's irresponsible, also. I think, to like just create one person out of these two people.
oh yeah, no, I don't believe in good guy, bad guy, monster.
Yeah, no, you don't. Yeah, I know we're on the same page about that. Like,
Yeah,
I think a lot of people make that mistake, or just do that willingly. It's very clear that like this is a dynamic of power between Eric and Dylan.
yeah,
That Dylan is someone, and look, again, I'm not defending anything that he did or like the reprehensible things that he did say, but it's also very clear that this is someone who is desperate for attention and love and acceptance and a friend, and he found that in a psychopathic,
yeah,
mass murderer. And like, again, like, yeah, you ultimately are responsible for what you do, but it's very clear that there is a sort of leader and a follower in this relationship, and that one of these people, probably, with the right interventions, could have been saved. And and it's pretty clear who that is.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, Dylan Klebold had a journal entry from, I think it's this is like a weird uploading. Someone had uploaded it in what looks like the world's first website. So it's hard to like, it's hard to read.
Ashley site dot angelfire
It
dot
is GeoCities. There's a lot of
yeah,
green font, a lot of black background.
a lot of sparkling
Uh,
text. Yeah,
Yeah, they editorialized, they wrote somewhere between July 23rd, 1997 and September 5th, 1997, he found love. And his journal entry is just so goddamn like, I mean, I feel just like he just says, I think I'm in love. It's just such a like, why couldn't you just be this person? Like,
yeah,
he's just describing her, and it's tempting to be like, oh, he was an incel. No, he's not mad. He's not. He's just describing this girl that he has a crush on,
yeah,
and he's like, and then he ends it with, I hope she likes techno. Dylan.
yeah. Yep.
People are gonna be mad at how for like, I don't know, sympathetic I'm being, but I hope she likes techno. I mean, I kept journal slash diaries. I mean, this is how I wrote there. I was, one non-hug away from being, no, maybe not, but I don't.
Sure. I mean, like as someone, I think one of the reasons that I got so angry as I learned more in the ensuing years about what really happened was that, like, as someone, I wore trench coats in high school, like I was one of those people, like goth adjacent,
Sure, yeah.
trench coat wearing kid. I certainly, like, when I was in public school, was so badly bullied at times where I would, like, boy, it'd be nice if I could just fucking kill all these goddamn people. You know what I mean? Like, and I
Everyone had that thought, and
yeah,
they
yeah, and
put
like
it in their
there's
fucking diaries. That's where it
absolutely.
lived.
Absolutely, but the way that the media turned Dylan and Eric into those people and basically
Yeah.
said that, like, and created this, like, even greater stigma against the kind of person that I was when I was in public school, right? That like, and then realizing, like, oh no, that's not this that isn't who these kids are at all. Like,
Goth kids
and
are the softest, softest, saddest. They're soft
yeah,
and sad. Leave them
yeah.
alone.
Have you not
Needed
seen fucking
murder.
Judd Nelson in The Breakfast Club? I mean, come on, like, that's
Look at it, he's wearing almost a trench coat,
he
or
is.
it's just
Yeah,
or just a very long coat, but
yeah.
yeah.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
yeah, it's really sad, and, if you, because I have both, I have Eric and Dylan's journal entries open, and juxtaposing them is Eric Harris is just furious, but I will say that in the basement tapes, which is such a, like, haunting thing to
Yeah,
call them, but
just yeah,
so
perfect. No
haunting.
notes. Yeah.
So as they're doing a bunch of, like, bravado, sort of, s swinging their guns around, and this is, like, I gotta be honest with you, they have these enormous guns in this basement, and part of me is like, "Where are your parents?" These are
Whoa.
so many I know.
Yeah, yeah.
They weren't bad. They weren't bad.
It's
Nobody was
1990s
quote unquote
Colorado
bad.
as well, like, it's still the wild, wild west, basically.
Sure.
Yeah.
But, at one point, like, Eric Harris he's alone in his room, and he has his, I'm gonna call it a camcorder because I assume that's what it was, has his
Mhm.
camcorder out, and he's talking to it, and he goes he's worried about what's gonna happen to his parents after this is done. He says, "My parents are the best fucking parents I've ever known. My dad is great. I wish I was a fucking sociopath so I didn't have any remorse, but I do. This is going to tear them apart. They will never forget it. No one is to blame except me and Vodka, which is Dylan's nickname. Our actions are a two-man war against everyone else." So that almost like says something like psychopaths don't generally feel that sort of thing, but like that's where he was too. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that didn't stop people from blaming the parents, of course, because they needed somebody to point a finger at, and it's always going to be the parents. But I mean, that's really sad. There's another scene in the tapes where they're start talking about who they're going to kill, and then for some reason, Eric starts thinking about how his mom always buys him snacks, and it makes him really sad. And he goes, "I really am sorry about this," he says, after just sort of talking about the snacks that his mother buys him. Am I going to cry? I might.
Mm.
I
I
might
mean,
cry
yeah,
when it.
it's the whole fucking thing's
And I know it's like, I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm only crying for Dylan and Eric, but to that I say, I I already feel sad for the victims. That's if you
obviously.
don't feel sad for the victims, there's something wrong with you. I think it's a little bit harder to try to find the humanity in the quote unquote bad guys. So, if you don't come here and virtue signal me with your goddamn what about the victim? I'm like, I already feel sad for the victims. That
Yeah,
sounds
and yeah, the reality is, like, the sadness is not for the perpetrators, it is for the way that everything the failure of just everything, right?
I
The
mean, I feel sad
system
for how
failure.
they felt. I feel
Yeah.
sad for how they felt, that this is what they thought they needed to do
Yep.
to end that pain and suffering that they were feeling. I feel sad that other people had to pay for that. And most of all, I feel sad that Greg's cat is clawing up his chair right now, and that's all I can hear. Can you hear it,
I
Greg?
can hear it.
Stag
I
is
can hear it.
tearing up the couch.
I can hear it.
Anyway, so,
I also, like,
yeah.
I wanna ask, like, because you mentioned the whole thing with the parents and, again, this happens there's so many variations of this now. what do you make of the Crumley parents being
Oh,
um, uh, found guilty of manslaughter?
I'm about to feel even if you thought I felt sympathy for Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, wait till you hear how I feel about poor Ethan Crumley, who is the
Mm,
son. For
yeah,
those who don't know, Ethan Crumley was the Oxford high school shooter. It was in, oh God, I wrote about this extensively, but the dates are leaving my brain. Like, was it 2018, 2019, 2020?
oh, I think it's more recently than that. I think it was like 22.
Yeah,
It's pretty
yes,
pretty recent.
forgive me. He was
Yeah.
15 years
Oh,
old at the
2021. So yeah,
2021, okay. He was 15 years old at the time.
yeah,
Uh, he was uh, he was also suffering mentally, unlike Dylan and Eric, he tried to get help.
yeah,
He wrote some alarming things in his journal, some very scary things, quite similarly, but he also wrote about trying to ask people for help and not getting any help, namely his parents, Jennifer and, is it James Crumley?
I
James and
think it is
Jennifer
James. It was
Crumley?
James. Yep. Yeah.
So the day that Ethan shot up his school and, I think maybe only 4 kids died that day. Forgive me again, my memory is bad, but, literally the day he had the gun in his backpack, he was drawing something quite alarming on a math worksheet. One of his teachers peered over and sent him to the principal's office because
Yeah.
it was violent,
That's what I do.
and yep, and they called the parents in and, they were like, they recommended that Ethan be taken home that day, and they just left him there. The negligence comes in the form of James Crumley was the one who bought the gun for his son that he later used to kill people, and
His
then there was
15-year-old son. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
his already mentally unwell son, and there was a lot
Yeah.
of there were a lot of factors involved in his sadness. He had one friend, that friend had just moved away. I'm gonna say I understand the next one, their family dog just died. So I'm not saying I'm gonna go somewhere and do something great, but this is a lot for a 15-year-old, and then on top of it, he's got 2 parents who are not there. The mother was having an affair with someone, and again, there's it's just speaking to how uninvolved in their son's life they were. So when they didn't take him home that day, he went to the bathroom, dropped his backpack, emptied its contents, pulled out the gun, and killed people.
Yeah.
More cat noises. Oh, bless you. This has never been this noisy. So
I hear
sorry,
it.
I don't know if you needed all that backstory, just if anyone didn't feel like Googling. And they were absolutely negligent. They were both found guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
Yeah.
I believe they both got 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
Ethan has a life sentence today, and I didn't tweet this. You're welcome, internet. Today, I briefly thought to myself, I would love to just say, in my opinion, though, those sentences should be reversed. I think James and Jennifer Crumley should have a life sentence, and I think that Ethan Crumley should have intensive therapy, and that he should do 10 to 15 years, especially because he's 15 years old and
I
he's
don't
got
disagree.
kid brain
Yeah.
on top of it.
Yep. Yep. I don't
And
disagree.
they failed him, and now he will be in prison for the rest of his life.
Yep.
I shocking. It's
Yeah.
just shocking that those people are going to get out. I hope they don't. And you know what I mean by that. Sorry, don't say that.
No,
Omit
I
that
look.
part.
I completely agree, and I'm sure we'll have people listening who think that perpetrators, no matter what, always deserve the highest, the worst consequences. But like, no, I don't think so. And I like this is a very different, and it's not, again, not to diminish the children who were murdered in this circumstance, but like a child who you give a gun to who is
Yeah.
screaming for help, like,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, that's your fucking fault. you
Yep.
you are
That's your fault.
like, that is your fault. You deserve to go to prison for life, and I really wish that they had.
Yep.
And
I
I
really
completely agree.
I
Yep.
agree as well. And if you listen to the victim impact statements, for like they victim impact statements are usually given right before the sentencing, so that the families you can let the judge know. Just they'll make a request of what they think the punishment should be, and they'll tell them it's the saddest thing to listen to.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty clear that most, if not all, of the parents of the children who Ethan Crumley killed were far more angry at Ethan Crumley's parents. I think they understood as well that, like, of course they're not, of course they don't not blame Ethan Crumley, but I think they understood really who was responsible for that
Yeah.
particular crime. And it wasn't the school. The school did everything right. Somebody tried to say they didn't. And I said, well, what are they supposed to do at that point? You can't force a parent to take a child home if they're not going to do it, unfortunately. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, but the opposite is true for the Klebold's and the Harrises, who were both
Yeah.
supportive. I mean, they named Dylan Klebold, the Sue Klebold, and I think is it Thomas Klebold? I can't remember her husband's name because he kind of drifted away. He was named after Dylan Thomas. I mean, these were like
Oh my god.
liberal. Hmm.
I never
These
knew
were
that.
these were
Jesus.
liberal hippies. These were like loving liberal hippies
So was
who
Bob
were
Dylan, and yet they blamed Marilyn Manson for it, It's weird.
incorrect.
Weird.
And they both listened to KMFDM. That was who they liked, Dylan and
Yeah,
Eric.
I know.
They
Yeah.
were not listening to like
Marilyn Manson.
quote unquote goth music, which is
Yeah, we
so yeah,
talked about
I'm
the MFDM thing a few months ago,
mhm,
right? That yeah,
mhm.
in relation to this, that they were like nothing to do with it. Sorry.
Yeah. Excuse us, we are so sorry.
Yeah.
This is very awkward. We
Listen,
are going on tour.
we are German. You know what I mean? So
Please come see us, but don't be mad. So yeah, the both of these people, I mean, the Harrises, I think they were treated like pretty heavily, primarily because everybody sort of understood that Eric Harris was the bigger aggressor and was the main drive behind what happened, and he was the scariest. So I think they bear the brunt of the blame.
yeah,
But in general, I mean, everybody made these people feel like garbage, like they had failed. And they didn't. I don't think they did at all. I mean, there's probably things I obviously don't know. I've tried to read as much as I could, but the only interaction I found, the only thing I found from Eric Harris's parents was something from 2010 when he agreed to meet with the parents of one of the victims, and the Daily Beast wrote about it, but they wrote about it from the viewpoint of the parents of the victims, and that woman provided her opinion of the Harrises and relayed what was said. But they were just like, we were blindsided. She said they accepted that their son was a psychopath, but they just had no idea. He was in therapy, he was on antidepressants, they were trying. It, it, what do you
yeah,
what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? So yeah.
yeah. What do you do? Yeah.
I know.
We don't have the answers to that, or if we did, then I'm sure.
And who didn't have the answers to that is Michael Moore. He certainly did not have
Well,
the
that
answer.
is true.
If you want to get into that, John, I
Yeah, let's get
welcome
into
that.
that. I
Let's get
yeah,
into that.
let's spend a few minutes on this because this is also really important. So again, if you're too young to remember this, 3 years after Columbine, Michael Moore releases his documentary, I put in air quotes, Bowling for Columbine.
Will you
And
explain the title? I think I
yeah,
remember why it was called that, but will you?
the title comes from one of the many misconceptions about Eric and Dylan that the rumor was so apparently they were in a bowling class and
Which is so
they,
crazy, and I couldn't be more envious of a bowling class. Like
no,
what?
I want that.
I
Do I
do
get
too.
credit for it? Yeah, that sounds rad. So Michael Moore's documentary, again air quotes, is one of the kind of the sort of launching points of its thesis is that how could these two boys go to bowling class in the morning and then go murder a dozen people and plus in the afternoon? And the reality is that they never went to bowling class that morning. They skipped it, and that they were fairly uninterested and uninvolved in that class anyway. But made a neat thing for Michael Moore to make a movie around and ask the question of like, what is behind the psychology of someone who just thinks it's cool to go from going bowling to like going murdering? And like, well, the reality is that none of that's true. So that's why Michael Moore. That's why it happened. Bowling for Columbine is one of the highest grossing documentaries of all time. It often shows up on the list of the greatest documentaries of all time. I think that Fahrenheit 9/11 is the
Is it
highest.
911 or 9/11?
Whatever, 9/11. Yeah.
I can't. I saw it in theaters, and you know who sat behind me? Shirley Manson.
Well, there you go. That's awesome.
That
Tell
was
that
exciting.
story sometime. Yeah, I think that's the highest grossing of all time. But Bowling for Columbine made a ton of money. It was a huge critical and commercial success. And it is deeply problematic for a number of reasons, some of which I blame Michael Moore for, some of which I don't necessarily blame Michael Moore
Mm,
for. The problem with looking into so there's two ways you can go about this. You can either watch the movie yourself and then
mm.
do research, a lot of research on the event itself and deconstruct it yourself, which is, frankly, it takes a lot of time, guys. So that's tough. The other thing you can do is like do some Google searching as to like the mistakes in Bowling for Columbine, or like what Bowling for Columbine gets wrong. And 99% of what you're going to find if you do that is like far right news outlets being like, guns are great,
Mhm.
and like, fuck Michael Moore, and like that's what he got wrong, is that
Yeah.
it's just that these two people just wanted to kill people and they would have found a way if guns were legal or not legal. And like, that's not true, but sure, all right, we can, whatever. So it's really hard to actually research anything that is well,
Yeah.
reasonable, that actually dissects. And I did find one, and I'm going to give credit to it. So it's a guy named Ian Scott. I have no idea who he is. he
Mm.
has he has a website, a blog that he does called Citizen Can't. um the tagline is, I try not to be right about movies, but I just can't help it. So he writes, he's a very good writer. He writes these actually very thoughtful pieces, sort of like challenging some of the assumptions that we make about certain movies, and like, like sacrificing sacred cows and that sort of thing, or or
Okay.
or agreeing with them. Look, but he's a good writer. He wrote a piece in his blog a few years ago, on the 20th anniversary of Bowling for Columbine. So this is August of 2022. And it's titled "Retrospective 20 Years Later, Bowling for Columbine is a Disgrace to Documentary Filmmaking.
Mm.
Michael Moore exploits America's most famous school shooting in this misguided monument to egotism." And I, I think he's basically right about most of it. I do think um, I think he's a little too unforgiving, or at least, or just not. I don't think he humanizes Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris enough. But I understand that the reason, kind of, why he's doing that is to basically, he's kind of dispelling some of the misconceptions that we talked about. These were like two nerdy outcasts, and they did it
Yeah.
because like they were depressed in Marilyn Manson, and and they played Doom too much and whatever. And his thesis is like, no, they did it because like this is what they wanted to do, and they like had a plan to do this, and they went in
Mhm.
with this plan, and it was long planned out, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I generally agree with what he says here. I think it is reasonable. He's a movie guy. He's not like a sociologist. So, I think a lot of what he says here is actually above and beyond what someone, I think, maybe of his, again, I know very little about this person, but of his, like his expertise is probably, it's quite good. The problem that and I'm going to kind of articulate his thesis as best I can and kind of boil it down. The problem that he sort of gets to when it comes to Michael Moore. So there's a couple things. One, Michael Moore is not a documentarian; he's a propagandist, right? And like,
Yeah.
I like a lot of what Michael Moore does. I'm a flaming lefty, like, he pisses off all the people that I want to be pissed off, and like, I can't help but be attracted to that sometimes. I also am very receptive to the criticisms of Michael Moore as a propagandist, and the idea that he's a documentary filmmaker is false. He's not a documentary filmmaker. He has an axe to grind, and he
Yeah.
creates narratives where he grinds that axe. I happen to like want to grind the same axes. Like, I get it, right? So I'm on board with him as far as that goes. I did see this movie in the theater. I was, personally traumatized by Columbine, like so many people of our age were. Right, it made me kind of reevaluate a lot of my assumptions about human nature
Yeah.
and other things. Um, the problem with this movie, if you want to kind of boil it down, is that one, he takes Columbine, he takes ownership over the Columbine label, and there is, as we have talked about, a lot to unpack here in a very kind of sober and deliberate way that nobody ever did. Like, the good Columbine documentary, as far as I know, doesn't really exist,
Mhm.
and all of the oxygen from Columbine was sort of sucked up by Michael Moore. The the other thing is that this is a post 9/11 movie, and there obviously is just this undercurrent of 9/11 happening in Columbine in this movie as well, right? Where like the post 9/11 trauma is also very clearly present here. He makes big swings about trying to blame Dylan and Eric on Lockheed Martin. It's like it's fucking insane. And I understand
Oh,
that like the military industrial complex sucks and is bad and we are a
yeah.
violent civilization and all of that is true, but like do not connect these dots.
No, no.
These are not
Everybody knows
worthwhile.
Lockheed Martin was actually responsible for JonBenet Ramsey, and that's a
That's
fact.
correct. Yeah.
You can actually Google that one. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. Google that one,
Okay. Okay.
guys. Google it.
There's a John Benet Ramsey theory involving literally everything in the world. But
Her father was associated with Lockheed Martin. I'm just saying Google. Just
okay.
get onto the Google.
I'll take a look at that. Yeah, I think it's irresponsible to make anything after 9/11 like within a year.
Ever.
Just like
Ever.
fucking calm down for a second and like because we're all losing our goddamn minds. So don't make any documentaries about like big sociological massive swings that you're taking like this one so soon after 9/11 when emotions are running high and we're all fucking insane. And I think that's part of, for better or worse, like a lot of what Michael Moore said in this documentary, I think has become for a bunch of like suburban liberals, like the gospel truth. Right. And it's not, it's bad. Now, a couple of things that I will credit him for in this documentary. I think that, so, okay, again, we got to separate two things out here. Marilyn Manson fucking sucks, but
true story.
He interviews Marilyn Manson to be like, are you responsible for Columbine? And Marilyn Manson's like, no, fuck that. What the fuck? Right. And people needed to hear that, honestly. Like that I think was an actually really important part of the movie. Fuck Marilyn Manson forever, but like he's a monster, but that's not why. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And that really does matter. So there's a couple of good things in it. I do think as well, like his thesis about the fact that as a country, like one of the things that is in our DNA as a country is fear. We are like afraid of everything. Most of our decisions are based on fear. We lock way too many goddamn doors for no reason. Everybody has a fucking ring.
I mean, there's definitely a reason on some of those doors.
Sometimes there is, but like if you live in suburbia with no crimes, like you don't need a fucking like remote doorbell viewer thing. Like you just don't need it. Like it's nothing's going to happen to you. That's why you live there. You won the lottery. Like you're rich enough to live in a safe space. You don't need a fucking doorbell that you have to monitor on your goddamn phone all the time. But like that we think we do. That's an important thesis. That's an important part of our gun fetish. It has nothing to do with Columbine. Like whatsoever. That these guys were able to get guns really easily is a really important part of the story, and we should way more heavily regulate guns. As far as I'm concerned, burn them all in a fire. Fuck guns. I hate them all. Like, that's my, I want to take your guns away. If you vote for me for president, that's what I'm going to do. But it's never going to happen, so it doesn't matter, right? So that's me, sure, and that's one thing, but like, the access to guns was a part of this story that is an ingredient to the story, but it is not the whole story. And the story is not about kids who liked Marilyn Manson and played Doom too much. And the problem is that like instead of really looking at that as a thesis for this movie, he just takes these giant fucking swings at like everything wrong with America. And it's like, dude, this is not like, rein it in. This is not the space for that. And does some fucking deceptive fucking shit too. And like, of course, I mean, you can talk about the Matt Stone interview and the way that it cuts to a cartoon that looks vaguely like South Park. And so the implication is that like Matt Stone and Trey Parker made that cartoon, which a lot of my friends thought they did. And like, that's the sort of shit that Michael Moore does intentionally, where it like looks like he's, whatever. That's Michael Moore. Michael Moore kind of sucks. I understand. Whatever. This movie's terrible. And the problem with it is that it has, I think, ultimately, because it has become the definitive Columbine movie, that it has, people have not made the real Columbine movie. And I think we need it. Like, I really do think that there needs to be a much higher profile dispelling of some of these ideas. Not that I think anything, we're ever going to stop school shootings or ever going to stop like the, ready availability of AR-15s to anybody who just like wants them on a whim. But at the same time, I do think that some of the more sort of toxic fallout from Columbine in terms of the way that it affected people who, again, are like already on the margins in high schools and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think that's really important to dispel some of that bullshit.
Yeah.
So
And just so everyone knows where they got the guns, uh, they were bought for Dylan and Eric. It was Dylan's girlfriend. She turned 18 and she bought the guns for them. So if anyone wants to, nerds don't have girlfriends buying them guns. So guys, I don't know if you want. There's another
that's,
one. I mean, maybe that was the girl he fell in love with in that journal, and God bless. You know, I don't. They didn't name her, and a couple articles they didn't name her. She was never charged with
I
anything. How
didn't.
could she have known?
Yeah, yeah. I didn't even
I
know she
mean,
existed. Right. Yeah.
yeah. I
Well, and
don't
the
know if
media
you.
wouldn't want you to know that she had a girlfriend. They had a girlfriend because like
No, it would not
that
fit in the
defies
loser loner
yep,
narrative. No,
100%.
losers and loners don't have girlfriends.
That's true.
Um, I don't know if you want to talk about, like, I wrote a little bit about. I couldn't find all of them. The There's 24 people, like I said, that were shot, and this cat thing is Greg. This cat thing. Uh, this chair's not going to be left by the time we're done recording. Um, I, I tried to find where all 24 were quote unquote today, or as close to today as we could, and so I couldn't
Okay.
find all of them. I mean, I think you saw the one that I tweeted about that I was the most upset about was
Yeah.
that was Richard Castaldo, who, as of February 2020, was. Are we saying unhoused? Is it homeless? I say homeless still
Unhoused.
because
Whatever. Yeah. It's yeah.
and he was yeah, it was reported. I think he's still living in Colorado, and that he was homeless. He was the shooting paralyzed him.
Where the fuck's that GoFundMe? Jesus Christ! Like people
That's what I'm
go start
saying.
like, what are we doing? Get a GoFundMe going for this guy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. He had, when a friend of his had figured out that he had had a MRSA infection. So on top of this, when he was in the hospital and when he was released from the hospital, he couldn't. It's because he didn't have a home. They had to transfer him to a convalescent center. So I think they were trying to raise money for him at the time. I mean, that makes me angry. Everybody wants to. Oh, the victims, the victims. I'm like, this guy was homeless. You want to? I think I tweeted, "Hey, Michael," because he was also in Bowling for Columbine. This guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
did. So I
Right.
didn't tweet at Michael Moore. Maybe he's on Twitter. Who knows? I just was like, why don't you? Maybe Michael Moore could like do something about this instead of
Well,
using
that's
his
the other thing
people.
about that movie is that it's like an hour in that movie before he talks to anybody from Columbine, and it's like,
Yeah. So
anyways,
that was one of them. One of
yeah,
the
it
one of the
was.
people that helped Michael Moore carve his name into the great great
Yeah.
documentarian slash propagandist Rushmore. That includes some other real big fucking losers. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Michael Moore is not bad. He's just, I don't know
No.
what he's doing. I get his little Substack. It's fun.
Oh, he's good at like writing
Stick
rants.
to the
Rants.
Substacks,
Yeah.
baby, or the Dom stacks if you're feeling like you want to do something different. You want to switch it up that day. You don't want to be a sub.
Okay.
You would get your Dom stack out. Sean Graves. There's a couple of people that have like spoken out pretty consistently throughout the year. So
Yeah.
in April 2019, obviously there was a lot of interviews around the 20th anniversary, and at the time he had a 3-year-old daughter. He was partially paralyzed after the shooting, and he sort of just talked about, unfortunately, how worried he was, rightfully so, about his own child now. And what he decided to do with his trauma was he speaks to law enforcement groups about, though this I'm not sure about this one, about the importance of school safety. I don't know what we mean when we say, "Hey, police, let's keep the school safer." I don't know what that could mean, but
Mm-hmm.
that's what he does. He tries. A very sad one, Stephen Austin Eubanks was shot multiple times in the head and knee, which, who's prescribed opioids for the pain. I think you know where this is probably going. Yep. Unfortunately, he within a few months he was starting to manipulate doctors for more prescription medication. Then, of course, he moved on to heroin. After a decade of doing that, he did get sober. He was doing speaking engagements about connecting a connection between violence, trauma, and the opioid
Yeah.
epidemic. But then, a month after the 20th anniversary, he did overdose and die.
But there's a happy ending there because the Sacklers made some money. So
There is and that's what it's all about.
you
When I
gotta
think
find the
about
silver lining.
when I think about it, that's what it's all about. We already
Yeah.
briefly mentioned Anne Marie Holzschalter, who I think that was the woman whose mother I think killed herself. She was left paralyzed by her injuries, and the only thing she had to say about her life was that she's in a great deal of pain and is often tormented by the media surrounding the tragedy. Although she did mention that Dylan Klebold's parents wrote her a letter a few months after the shooting, and she said she described it as genuine and personal, and then described her interactions with Eric Harris's parents. Not that anyone's not villainizing anybody, but theirs was less friendly for her. I don't know what happened to the Harrises. They didn't handle this well. Nobody handled it well, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um, I think this is Mackay. It's Makai, so please forgive me. Mackay Hall. He was in the library. He was one of the kids in the library. He was one of the first people who got shot. He actually watched his friend Patrick Ireland get shot in the head after Patrick had gotten up to try to give it like assistance, like medical assistance to um, some of the like I don't know if he was doing CPR or what, but he was trying to help some of the other kids. And when while attempting to do that, he was shot in the head. The Patrick Mackay decided he was like after spending so much time in the hospital being cared for by nurses and doctors, he decided to become a nurse himself. That's
Good for him.
I mean, can we say that's lovely? Like
It
it's
is.
an awful way to get there, but
No, that's great.
what a nice period. That's it. Yes. So Patrick Ireland, let's see. He was the kid who crawled out of the window. That was Patrick
Right. Yep.
Ireland.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
he was left with a limp and permanent damage to his right hand. He told the Mirror that 7 months of physical therapy was like elementary school again. He went on to study business finance at Colorado State University, where he met his wife on the first day. Day
Oh,
one.
that's nice.
Day one. They have 3 kids together. Day one. Lance Kirkland, we talked about. That was the kid that was shot in the face, and it destroyed half of his jaw.
Right.
He was also shot in both legs and his chest. He told PBS that everything was sort of fine for him until 2015 for no apparent reason. Not no apparent reason. He bought a new business. He got very stressed out. Eventually, he was a single father. He turned to drinking. Then he got treatment, found therapy, and he's sort of like, I think this was probably 2019 as well. When he told the story, he was sort of very hopeful for the future after this sudden like onslaught of PTSD
Yeah.
16 years after the fact. Very
Yeah.
tricky, PTSD, very
Yeah.
tricky.
Yeah. You never know when it's going to hit. It's, yeah.
Yep. Evan Todd, at one point during all this, one of the shooters pointed a gun at Evan Todd's head and said, "Why shouldn't we kill you?" Can you imagine?
Yeah.
They didn't, but they did shoot. They did, but they did shoot him, but obviously he didn't die.
Kill him.
Evan went in a very different direction. He thinks that having a gun is the best protection. And
Okay.
he thinks that and I get it. I think when you are in something like this, you're allowed to have that thought. Anyone's allowed to have a thought, but you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like it makes sense when you have this thought to me. But just like yokels in the world who've never had anything happen to them, acting like everyone's coming after them, screaming about guns. I don't get that. But guy who was at Columbine? Yeah, buddy.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Get
but like on that note, I completely agree with what you're saying, and the reality is that like the NRA also understands that, so they have convinced all those people who have never experienced anything, or like even just people living in suburbia, that is their reality, that like they are likely to find themselves in that situation, and so they're just basically, I mean, you know, you find yourself where you're a sitting duck, right? Where these people are just like gunning you and your friends down right, left, and center, and you're like, man, I wish I had a gun then, right? And it's like, yeah, that makes sense. I I
yeah.
understand why you think
Yeah.
that. And then the NRA is like, hey, imagine that was you. Don't you wish you had a gun now and always? That's like, so it's the manipulation of that very real response that I completely understand. I
Sure.
don't think it's right. I don't think having more guns makes anybody safer, but I do understand that
Yeah.
emotional reaction to it. It's the way that is then people are like sort of conditioned to believe that is their reality, and it's absolutely fucking
Yeah. It's
not.
also hilarious
Most
to
of
think
us.
about like 2 things. the way that people are convinced of how they would act in that situation. If I had
Sure.
a gun, if you had a gun, you would piss your pants. You just
Yeah.
it'd be heavy. They'd be heavier because the gun would be in your pants. But I doubt very seriously anybody in that situation would maybe remember to pull out a gun
Well, and
from
also you're dealing with people who like
wherever it is.
who aren't trying to shoot specific people most of the time, and like you have these two particular guys that you're trying to shoot. So it's like already they're just mowing people down, and they don't care who they're shooting. You're like, I care who I'm shooting. These two guys. It's
Yeah.
not easy. It's not a 1-to-1. Like it's not to get all.
Well, also don't please don't think it's easy to kill someone in general, even if
Yeah.
you're protecting yourself.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that you're still like taking a life is not going to be an easy choice, even in
Right.
self defense. I think so. Always like your human mind, I think, is not going to want to like kill, 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 kill. So I don't
Yep.
know. And also in terms of like if we had guns, they'd have guns. Well, also if you pared down on the guns a bit, there'd also be less guns from the
There'd be
bad
fewer
guys.
guns. Exactly. They'd be harder
Period. It's
harder
not
to
like
get.
there'd just be less guns for the quote unquote good guys. There would just be
Right.
full stop less guns
Yeah.
of the bad kind. Guys, go to the shooting range and have fun with your guns. Look, hunting makes me sad, but I eat meat, so I'm a hypocrite. Do it safely out in the woods. Don't drink, but y'all are going to, and you're gonna blow your dumb feet off and go, I can't believe that happened. I'm like, no, I can't. That's they're covered in deer piss or whatever they're doing.
I
But
like
like,
John Woo movies. I'm a hypocrite. I understand. Like whatever. Sure.
yeah, we're not saying anything new. It's just I just don't. I've never understood the argument, the actual pretend argument for needing a high powered. Like, what is the real argument? You don't need to protect your home by shooting like a gazillion bullets per or whatever it is. Like, I don't get it. A 9mm or some other smaller gun will do the trick.
Yeah.
But okay,
Yep.
I don't know.
Anyway.
Also, don't worry about the government coming for you because they're going to have tanks and drones, and your little goddamn gun's not going to do anything if you're that worried about the government that you love so much.
Yes.
I love the government, but they're always after me. Well, it can't be
I'm
both.
I'm the only person that I know who like would take your guns away. But there's a lot of steps that I'd have to get through to get to the point where I have the power to do that. So like, don't worry about me. It's not going to happen.
Worry about it.
I'm ineligible to be president anyway. First of all, like that's issue number
You
one.
hear that? So
Issue
don't
number
ask me.
two: no president has the power to take your guns away, nor ever has, nor has ever wanted to. So you're fine. You're fine. Your guns are not going anywhere. Stop. Just you're good. You're good.
Yeah, they're going to
Stop
be
buying
right
them.
there in your safe. And so when you're being robbed, I have no doubt in my mind that the robber's going to go, yeah, I'll wait till you punch the code in. Go ahead. Beep, beep,
Yeah,
beep,
and
beep, beep.
also like
You better have it in a safe. But anyway, yeah.
buying more of them is not going to like don't be like, well, the government's going to take them away, so I better buy some more. Like, no, they're going to take those away too if they take them away. Like, it's not having more of them is not going to help you.
They're all going to
You
be
can't
gone.
use them all at once. You can use 2 at once maybe if you're Chow Yun Fat, but that's about it.
So again, that wasn't a lot of the survivors, but those are the only ones I could find. I mean, I'm reading off of something I had to write, so I didn't have a lot of time to dig deep. Sorry, guys. My job, I guess, is it's quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, 24 people lived that day. And
that is good. I mean, like, like I hate to find any kind of silver lining, but like that's not something we talk about a lot, and like I think we should elevate those people more and listen to more what they have to say, honestly.
And there's also like everyone in that school that day is a survivor. I think when we hear the word survivor, we of course think of the people that were shot and didn't die. But every single person survived that because it was the only thing that kept them alive, unfortunately, was, I'm going to use the word luck. Like for some reason, they didn't pass your classroom. They didn't enter. They didn't find you. They decided to end their lives before they could hurt anybody else. Whatever it was, you were lucky. Yeah.
Yeah. But unlike the mass school shootings of today, this one did actually really change. It changed the mood in the country for quite some time. And of course, we've mentioned this before. Like the Buffy finale was postponed for several months. A bunch of movies were delayed. The movie O, starring Mekhi Phifer and Julia Stiles and Andrew Keegan.
Othello. Was that Othello?
It was Tim Blake Nelson's Othello. It was basically 10 things. So this is the weird thing, is that it was like a modern high school adaptation of Othello with Julia Stiles that was supposed to come out the same year as 10 Things I Hate About You. which would have just been bizarre. So it was supposed to come out that year. That was delayed for 2 years, I think. I think it came out 2001.
Also, listen, Denzel Washington already did it. You don't need to. We don't need to have any modern versions. We have the most perfect performance of Shakespeare's Othello, at least cinematically, with Mr. Denzel Washington. So,
Wait, are you talking about Lawrence Fishburne? I think you're talking about Lawrence Fishburne.
oh, I'm sorry. I thought Denzel
Denzel
Washington
Washington
was
did
in
Macbeth.
Othello.
The current one,
Oh,
which is
sorry.
perfect.
Well, then go watch Macbeth. I've maybe never seen Othello. Oh, that's
Yeah.
embarrassing.
Yeah. No,
Sorry,
Othello
everybody.
with Lawrence Fishburne and Kenneth Branagh is very good as well. But
Oh, Kenneth Branagh.
yeah, things, believe it or not, like we had a big national conversation as a country, as opposed to being like thoughts and prayers. We'll argue for a minute and then it will be off the news tomorrow. And then we'll wait for the next one to happen, which is what the pattern that we have found ourselves in now. And I don't think it is sustainable, and fuck that. And eventually, I don't know, something's got to give eventually, but
yeah. Also, sorry, in my meager defense, the reason why I said that is because he's playing Othello in Broadway opposite of Jake Gyllenhaal. Sorry, I
right.
put Denzel Washington in that role because he's about to be Othello on Broadway.
Yeah.
That I'd like to see. Anyway, so sorry. Yes.
And then also he was in Much Ado About Nothing around this, like in the early 90s.
There was a lot of that. There was a weird run of Shakespeare, and there was like that Midsummer Night's Dream adaptation, which nobody but me likes, and that's fine by me. I'll take it.
Yeah, I like it.
So,
I don't love it. I like it.
It was released in what year, John?
1999. We have an episode about it. Go check it out. Yeah, actually, and Denzel Washington, very good Shakespearean actor. I mean, I think he was in Julius Caesar as well.
Did you just see? God, I'm sorry, guys, we're on a tangent, but you know what? It's been a little sad, so let's take a tangent. He was on Colbert. I don't know if this was an old clip fed to me or a recent clip, and they were doing Shakespeare to each other while he was guesting on Colbert, and it was beautiful.
Nice.
And God, Denzel Washington's just so good. He's just so good.
His Don Pedro in Much Ado is just wonderful. It's just so God, yeah, he's so fucking electric, charismatic, and like, awesome. That's one of the best Shakespeare movies ever made, by the way. It's so fucking good. Anyway, so that was fun. All right, we got through it. We did the Columbine episode. Yay!
We did.
All right.
I mean, I'm still going to reference this in a slightly joking fashion, just simply because that's just what you got to do, I think, sometimes.
Yep, I agree. As long as you're not doing it at the expense of victims, I think anything is fair game. So gallows humor gets us through a lot of living in America in 2024.
Yes.
Which may be better than living in America in 2025. We'll find out. We'll see.
Maybe.
Who knows?
Some of
Could
us,
be worse.
Some of us won't get there.
You know who won't get there? O.J. Simpson. Anyway, on that note,
the juice is not loose.
Juice is no longer loose. The juice is put back in the container, sent back from the juicer from whence he came. I don't know if I can keep this going. All right, that'll do it. Sorry about this one. We tried to have some fun in between, but go hug somebody and be kind to people and look out for frogs, and we'll see you next time.